Right, hi everyone. Welcome to Home Study Sessions with Miss Fleur, specifically for my Year 10 students, but obviously any other Year 10 students can watch them. But I was making them to go off where we got up to as a class, okay? And where we are starting with early modern health. So, a bit about these sessions. What we're doing, we're carrying on learning about people's health. We want to finish this course, okay? So we can get on to something else. The reason we're doing it, staying at home as we've been told to do, is completely the right thing to do. School will resume, and when it does, there will be gaps in learning. That's to be expected, but we need to fill them, okay? And learning at home will ensure these gaps are not huge and that you still get the grade you deserve by the end of year 11. Finally, what you need to do. I really want you to take this seriously and use the time wisely. This work will need to be done. Do it now, and it means you don't have to do it later, which is already a good thing. It's not going to be as, taxing, as difficult as potentially work would be in class. It's at home and there's lots of distractions for everyone, but if you could give it a go, that would be really, really good for you, okay? Right, how these work. There will be talking, okay? I will talk. My class know me. I do like to talk, go on a bit, okay? There will be stuff to do. You will have to do activities. It's not just going to be me talking like a lecture. There'll be stuff for you to do as well. You will need a pen and paper to write your work down. Keep it neat, okay? Maybe keep it in a book if you've got one from school, or keep it all together so you can bring it back to school when school resumes. And then finally, there will be a bell sound when you can pause, okay? The bell will sound like this. Now, when that bell sounds, you can pause for as long as you like, either to go and get any equipment that you need or to study whatever source or information is on the screen, okay? Right, so just to contextualize where we were at. So we're just going to have a recap in this section. We're going to go back to what we were doing just before we left school, just in case any of you forgot, which would be completely reasonable. Before we left school, we were looking at early modern health, and we were asking, was it more of the same in terms of what was happening in the medieval period, so from 1250 till 1500? Was it a continuity with what was happening in that period, or were there big changes? And the aspects of health that we looked at was food, waste, water quality, living conditions, poverty, and technology. Okay? What we were investigating was the health of the people in the early modern period different or very different to that in the medieval period? Does it represent change or continuity? Now, we're historians, so of course it's going to be a bit of both. But was it more significantly changed? Was there a lot of change? Or was it that there were more continuities, okay? That things didn't change a huge amount and health really was the same. Right, so activity 1, source time. I'm going to play the bell now because I would like you to make sure you have a pen and pencil or paper, whatever you are going to be working on. Right, wonderful. Hopefully you're back now after having gotten what you need to do this. So I would write down at the top, if it were me, I'd write down activity 1, source time. You don't have to put the exclamation mark, that's just me being cringe. Right, so what we're going to do, I've made an inference about this particular source, okay? The inference is that the health of rich people in the early modern period got better. It changed, absolutely, and it improved, okay? It changed for the better. Now, what I want you to do is to pause this video and then find 5 things in this portrait that show us something, tell us something about early modern health, okay? Anything that gives you an indication of what the health of these people in this portrait was like, I would like you to write them down in a list, and minimum 5, okay? Take as long as you need, pausing now. Right, excellent. Now, I hope that you found that pretty easy. So let's go through what I got when I was recapping this source. So, first of all, these people, clearly quite rich, they can afford a variety of food. There's lots of different types of food on their table. Like down there, we've got some fruit and we've got some grapes. They are showing it off. Right, next thing. They have fruit, okay? Fruit is exotic. It has to, especially if it is something like, well, those grapes there, it has to have been grown somewhere really hot. And as we know, England is not hot enough to grow all these different types of fruit. So it's probably been brought from somewhere further away, okay? Or at least the seeds have, if it has been grown here at all. Now, as you see, that little kid down there, she's got a whole plate of cherries for herself. Now, that shows that obviously they're quite wealthy and they think that fruit is important for their health. Right, next thing, they've got gold, okay? They've got gold or precious metal, and that shows us that these people are rich. Them being rich doesn't tell us a lot about their health directly, but indirectly it tells us that they've got more resource to take care of themselves, okay? Right, next thing they've got a pet bird, okay? Look at that little creep there. They've got a little bird. If you've got a pet bird, then not only are you showing off that you have you have access to exotic animals, but you've obviously got the food and stuff to keep it alive, okay? Or they're just waiting till they can kill it and eat it. But I think it's probably actually a pet, okay? Right, now, next thing. They've got loads of kids, okay? They've got loads of quite creepy looking kids that they are keeping alive. As we know, infant mortality, which is the rate at which children unfortunately die when they're young, was quite high. I mean, in the medieval and early modern era. So for a family to have 6 kids, one set of triplets. Was it one set of triplets and 2 sets of... Well, it's at least 2 sets of twins, maybe 1 set of triplets, 1 kid, and then 1 set of twins. Who knows? Who knows? They all look basically the same. But they've got loads of kids they're keeping alive, so I've just highlighted probably the least creepy looking one of the lot. Okay? Right, next thing. The Lord's mum is still alive, so people are living longer. Up there she is, okay? So life expectancy for rich people is increasing during this time. And we could not say that for everyone. It's probably just the rich people, but life expectancy is getting better for the people that can afford to take care of their health. And overall, I didn't put a circle on this because this would be everything. Overall, they are showing off what they have. Okay? You would think in a portrait, you would probably just want people's faces in it, right? Maybe their torsos. But in this picture, they've got all of their faces, all of their torsos, all of their, rich clothes, and also this wonderful table of food, okay? So they're clearly showing that off. That is something they're proud of. Right, so next thing. Now, activity 2, we're going to be using this source. If you want to have a look at it, just for a little while, I'll press the pause button so you can just take in what is happening in this 16th century marketplace. Right, wonderful, you're back with me. So, as it says at the top, in this activity, activity 2, I'll write that at the top now, we are describing key features of the early modern urban environment. Urban meaning in a town, okay? Environment meaning what the place is like. There is a lot going on in here, and yeah, so we're going to pick out features. What you are going to do is you are going to write things, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out features and give you a brief description of them, and you are going to write down what impact these features may have had on health. You need to say if they have a positive impact on health and why, or if they have a negative impact on health and why. Okay, I don't know why I haven't written that there, I'm just being sloppy. I'll do an example first, and when we get into doing the ones, when we get into doing them a bit faster, pause for as long as it takes you, okay? So just to recap, I'm going to tell you what the feature is, and you're just going to tell me what kind of impact it might have had on health. So example 1, right, this down here, I'm not entirely certain what creature this is, but it's definitely an animal, okay? And it's roaming the streets. Dogs, cats, rats, mice, all through the market, roaming the place. I mean, yeah, they're everywhere, okay? So what you might write down, if I've picked out this feature and you have paused at this point, I'm not going to play the bell now, but you've paused at this point, you might write down something along the lines of, animals roaming the streets would have had a negative impact on health. Disease would spread through the germs and bacteria on the animals themselves and through their waste. Early modern people did not know that bacteria spread disease, okay? So they've got these animals roaming around the streets. They know it's not great, but they don't know that that is something that is spreading disease and the ill health they're experiencing, okay? So that's the example. Right, now, next one, okay? So the feature I'm picking out for you is, street surface. It's just earth. Okay, it would get dusty in summer and muddy in winter. So I'm going to pause and then you're going to tell me what impact this would have had on health. Right, cool. Hopefully you're back with me. So, example answer of what you may have written down. This had a negative impact on health. Dirt and mud is going to be another thing that allows the bacteria that causes disease to spread. It might get on the food that's being sold or into the water source, contaminating it and spreading bacteria, which is going to cause people to be ill. Okay? Right, so far so straightforward. Next one. So this feature is... Oh, now this was tenuous for me, okay? I think that this little grey blob down here is smoke. Okay, so air quality. As well as the smoke rising from food sellers, there will be chimneys letting out smoke from houses that could afford to have chimneys, okay? So basically the air quality is pretty bad. So I'm going to pause now and you're going to tell me how that's going to have a negative or positive impact on health. Right, I hope that was reasonably straightforward, even if I've taken a bit of a maverick view about what smoke might be in this picture. So, you might write down, or might have written down even, smoke from houses and fumes from the market would have caused people to have illnesses of the lungs and airways. These are known as respiratory diseases. They might not kill you quickly like the plague, but they would shorten your lifespan as your lungs failed over time. Okay? Now, this is a bit of a change, as a side note here. In the medieval times, they probably wouldn't have had as many respiratory diseases because they didn't have as much smoke, they didn't have chimney stacks in houses, and the industry that they had in markets wasn't really giving out as much fumes. So it is at this time, in the early modern period, when people start to have respiratory diseases, and that does have an impact on public health generally. Okay? Right, so next one. Ooh. Houses made from oak frames. These easily got damp from the rain, and fire would spread easily if it took hold. So, pausing now for you to tell me if that's going to have a positive or negative impact on health. Right, wonderful, okay. Now, this one hopefully is quite straightforward. You might have written down, poor quality damp housing would allow disease to spread. Respiratory and infectious diseases. Houses burning down is never going to be good for health for many reasons. Homelessness as an example. Okay? Right. So, another side note, over the early modern period, people did start to build their houses out of brick and stone, especially in towns. And as my group have looked at, they did also lime wash their houses to make them more repellent to the rain. But for a lot of people, especially the poor people that have migrated into urban centres, they're still, at least to begin with, building their houses out of damp, well, wooden frames that are going to get damp, okay? Right, so that pause probably sounds really weird. I started laughing, so I had to pause the video. Now, back to activity 3, water, okay? Now, just a word about transmission of disease. We are all hyper aware, really aware of how disease spreads, especially with this COVID-19 stuff going around. We have to remember that people in the early modern period did not know how disease was spreading, and they didn't know it was spreading through water. Now, we know now, science has taught us that bacteria in water can make you sick. They didn't know that then. As an early modern person, your perspective of dirty water would be water that literally looks dirty. Okay? They wouldn't want to bathe in that kind of stuff, but they might have had to. They didn't know it was actually the bacteria they couldn't see that was making them ill. Right. Now, with that said, what we're going to do in this activity is I'm going to read stuff to you, and then you are going to answer questions. Again, looking out for the bell and taking as much time as you need to answer them. So, people in the early modern period did care about being clean. They washed their clothes and food in the water they had access to. How clean you could get yourself and your clothes and your food depended on how wealthy you were. People would have washed their bodies, clothes and food in the water that they had available and had access to. Now, there are 3 ways to get access to water in the early modern period. Option A, paying for water to be piped directly into your house. In some towns, there were pipes constructed of lead or elm, which is wood, that could be used to get water into houses. In 1609, a man called Hugh Middleton built a whole new river to bring water into London. This river stopped at a reservoir in North London, in Islington, and then was piped via these pipes that were laid into 30,000 houses. People would pay a fee 4 times a year to have this service. Okay, so a bit expensive. Now, option B is to collect the water from a conduit yourself. Conduits, if you remember, were pipes that had openings where people could collect their water. Local authorities or individuals, philanthropic, that means charitable individuals, would install them in towns as acts of charity. Churches, who also needed clean water to do their various religious rituals, would also install conduits. Okay, and these conduits were free to get water from. Then option C, buying water from a water seller, and you can see in this little engraving up here, it's an interpretation, not a source, but it's an engraving of what water sellers in the 1700s might have looked like. Okay, now water sellers collected water from conduits and could bring it to your house for you. They carried it in large containers and you could pay them for this service. So if you have a look at this bloke here, he's got 2 buckets that are connected by a bit of string to this kind of yoke, I suppose it looks like, over his shoulder, and he would bring that to someone's house for a fee. Now, whichever way you get your water, it would have tasted bad and it would have been unsafe. Okay, so whichever way you're getting the water, you are risking getting ill from it because it could be contaminated. This is why people preferred weak beer, which is safer to drink. Now, again, they didn't know that it was safer to drink because it has been fermented, therefore it's been boiled, and if something's been boiled, most of the germs have been killed. They didn't know that, they just probably observed Dave over there is drinking beer, he's not ill, whereas over there we've got Trisha, who is drinking a lot of water and she seems to have gotten quite sick. Okay? Right, so questions for you. Which method would rich people use and why? Which method do you think poor people would use and why? And then, probably trickier one, what type of people would use method C and why, or how would you make that inference? Okay, go. Right, answers. Now, they're in purple because that's how we do things. Okay, that's the Chaucer way. Right, as usual, the method of getting water depends on how much money people have. Again, highlighting how things are changing and improving for rich people and continuing to be of poor quality for poor people. So, question 1, which method would rich people use and why? Rich people would be most likely to pay for water to be piped directly into their houses. They were the only class of people with enough money to do this. They would need reliable water sources and would use a greater amount of water for occasional baths and washing clothes. Okay, now think of this is a bit of a side note, think of the whole process of having a bath. At that time, you need a servant who's got lots of firewood to basically heat up your water for you. You need a large amount of water all in the same place at the same time, so you need some sort of big receptacle for it to sit in, and you need a lot of time on your hands to wait for that bath to get hotter. So that is going to need you to have a reliable water source, which rich people could have afforded. So you can see why it's only rich people at this time who are being able to schedule in their baths, maybe, definitely not every day, but, monthly, probably less frequently than that. Okay? Right, so question 2. Which method do you think poor people would use and why? Poor people would obviously have to collect the water from conduits themselves. As you can see in the information, it's free, and they didn't have the money for other methods and would have to take advantage of this free water. They would have to make do with less water and would not have been able to wash themselves regularly even if they wanted to. Now, on the note of poor people, if you are poor, you probably have 1, maybe if you're very lucky, 2 changes of clothes. And every time you wash them, bear in mind these are going to be thick cotton, which lots of fleas and lice can live in. Every time you wash them, you're going to have to, as much as you are trying, if it's in cold water, those fleas and lice are probably still going to remain there, okay? So even though they're trying to be clean, it might not be having the desired effect. And then finally, what type of people would use method C, buying water from a water seller? People needing consistent water but not having loads of money to get it piped to their houses. Well, middle income people, okay, like traders and successful market sellers would likely buy water from water sellers. They would have the requirement for a reasonable amount of water and have the money to pay for people to get it to them, but maybe not enough to get pipes installed straight to their houses, okay? Right, here we are, last thing for this session. So, saving the best for last, it's waste. Right, how this is going to work, this is activity 4, by the way. Again, I'm going to read you some information, and then you're going to have a task to do afterwards. So, people in early modern England produced a lot less rubbish than we do, mainly because of the packaging on stuff that we have. The waste they did make, food, paper, ash from their fires, could be put outside the house and collected by scavengers. It was the wee and poo that was more difficult to deal with. Okay? Nearly everyone in England continued to use privies, as people had done in the medieval period. A privy is basically a hole positioned over a drop, and you can see some lovely pictures over here of different types of privies. We are mainly concerned with this one down here at the bottom. Right, if you were someone who lived next to a river, you would position the privy drop over the river so that the waste would just flow away and would not be your problem anymore. Now, that would definitely cause a problem for someone else, as it would contaminate their water, potentially downriver. But, again, not your issue. If you did not live next to a river, which is the majority of people not living next to rivers, this privy would have to go in your garden, and the hole for the privy, known as the cesspit, would be dug underneath it and lined with barrels. You can see them down here, okay? The problem with cesspits is that sometimes they overflowed. The barrel inside might burst with the cesspit getting too full. Every year or two, the barrels at the bottom needed to be emptied by gong firmers. Now, the emptying was an expensive service, so it would be a problem if your cesspit needed emptying and for some reason you lacked the money for that to be done for you. Okay, gong firmers were paid really, really well because no one wanted their job. Okay, now famously, who was it? Samuel Pepys stepped into what he called a great heap of turds, which had leaked into his cellar from the neighbourhood cesspit. So these leaking cesspits are not, it's not a rare problem, okay? It is an issue. Right, so now the questions that you have to answer, well, actually they're definitions this time, okay? So, first thing I want you to do is all these bold words that can be found within the text, scavenger, privies, contaminate, cesspit, and gong firmers, I would like you to write your own definition of each one. Okay? And then second question, how could an overflowing cesspit negatively impact people's health? Okay, and just a word from my group mainly, a latrine, for those wondering, is basically a privy that's indoors. So privies connected to houses that were next to rivers could be called latrines as well as privies because the bit where you sit on the privy is inside your house. Rich people had latrines indoors, poor people didn't. They would have these privies that would be in outhouses like in their garden or their yard. Okay, so with all that on the screen, pause and have a go at those two questions. Right, now the answers. So, definition for the first one, a scavenger, someone who would collect household waste, so you're thinking food, ash, paper, that kind of thing, from outside people's houses, usually about once a week, and definitely something that would happen in towns, not so, wouldn't be as common in the countryside. Now, privies, a hole over a long drop. This was the main method by which people actually expelled, I suppose, their wee and poo. Contaminate. If you contaminate something, you spoil it with something harmful or bad. Bad or harmful, as I've written. Human waste being disposed of in a river would be an example of this. You would be contaminating that water source with bacteria, although, as I have said constantly, banging on about it, they wouldn't know that that is necessarily what they were doing. Right, cesspit. The pit that is dug into the ground over which the privy sits. This would be lined with barrels which would be emptied every year or two, that you can see down here. Okay, this little lad is sitting over some barrels. Then gong firmers. Okay, here is a gong firmer. Here he is. people who would come and empty a cesspit, they got quite well paid, as their job was something that people really wanted to avoid doing themselves. If you did have to do it yourself, you would normally, well, gong firmers would also come and do it at night, okay, when there's less people out and about in the streets, and often people would have to wheel the barrels through their houses, which is obviously not healthy, but that is the only way they're going to get rid of the barrels, okay? So, and this would happen, as was said in the information, every year or two, which is actually less often than I thought it would happen, but there we go. You'd obviously need your gong firmers in an emergency if your cesspit overflowed. Right, now, question 2. How could an overflowing cesspit negatively impact people's health? Overflowing cesspits would negatively impact health as the bacteria found in human waste would come into contact with people. If the cesspit was really overflowing, there's a chance it could contaminate nearby water sources, which would cause disease outbreaks in the local area. Okay, now that is our perspective on what would have happened. Putting yourself in the position of someone in the early modern period, they would know that having poo and wee everywhere was not very good, but they wouldn't necessarily know that the bacteria that is in those things would be what was causing them to feel sick, okay? They would just know that it smells and it's disgusting, although on that note, they did think that bad smells cause disease, okay? And what are bad smells called? That's right, miasma. Very well done. Right. Now, so that is the first session done. Well done. So this whole bit of the catch-up is done. We've mainly done living conditions. The next sessions that I will do, which will actually be shorter than this one, I'm sorry this one's gone on for so long. The next ones we'll do the Great Plague and reactions to the plague, so individual, local and national reactions. This will be a recap for a lot of you. And then we'll go on to alcohol and the national government, specifically Gin Lane and Beer Street, those two brilliant sources that we have looked at, or some of us have looked at before, but with a bit more context and background information about what was actually done to curb drunkenness in towns. Okay, so I will see you soon. Hope you've enjoyed that, and yeah, in a bit.